And we're already recording? Yes? Okay. Product Board Engineering Leadership Podcast. Welcome once again to the Product Board Engineering Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Sandberg, and my guest today is Daniel Hejl, CTO here at Product Board. Welcome to the program, Daniel.
Hey, I'm excited to do this. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, I'm super excited as well. We talked last time about how we are definitely going to be having non-Product Board guests, but as it happens, the first two guests in the history of the podcast are my former manager today and my current manager last time. So in the early going, the podcast is who's who of leadership for me personally at Product Board. So that's a little fun. Our topic today will be facilitating employee growth, and I'll just start with a personal observation, Daniel, that I'm really excited to talk to you specifically about this, not only because you certainly know something about it, but of any founder or leader that I've worked with, or at least in the very top few, you seem to have been very thoughtful about this topic very early in your journey to being a founder or leader. I think different topics become important to people at different times. And my experience with you is that you think about this a lot, but also somehow that you awaken to it very early in your journey. And so I find your perspective on it very interesting for that reason. So little kudos to you for that.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, I think, one of the things I realized is that in my career, I always optimized for, where I can learn the most. So I was joining companies where I felt that I can learn a lot and I can grow and, progress towards my goals. And once I felt that there's not much more to learn, then I had the tendency to leave. And so, if this is how most engineers are thinking, then, companies better think really hard about their, career development, processes and plans.
Yeah, and so you've maybe half answered this already, but I want to start with the question of what are the really, really concrete reasons that we're talking about this question at all? Why do we need a systematic approach to growth when we're already hiring a bunch of the best engineers who have growth mentality as part of their mindset already? Aren't they just going to read every blog post and go to every conference out of their own strong motivation and just grow into the greatest engineers and leaders ever anyway?
I think they will. I think that it's not like without company support, people wouldn't improve and wouldn't learn. And, I have as well in my career, I worked for companies that there was almost no support, from the company, and still, I progressed. So it's not like people are not going to learn at all. But from my experience, what I've observed here at Product Board and, interviewing hundreds of different engineers and from my past companies, I've seen that, you as an engineer can grow at least twice as fast if you are in a company that really supports that, compared to, companies that don't have maybe that's such a strong engineering culture and they don't have such a strong focus on helping their engineers to grow.
Do you have a specific story about a mistake that a leader made with you, or that you made with somebody, that really hammered home to you the point that this doesn't work if the leader is not committed to it and thinking about it? Was there a particular, you don't have to name names, but was there a particular mistake or company you left where you said, wow, in retrospect, this was really bad, and that was the thing that drove me out? It was growth specifically, and this was the day, or this was the...
Well, maybe I will start with positive example that was super early in my career. I was maybe 20 back then. I know I was working for these big international companies, still quite junior engineer, and suddenly I got this trust to lead quite a big project. It was quite a big infrastructure change across 5 different countries in Europe of that company. And so suddenly in my, when I was 20, I was flying around Europe and, leading this change of infrastructure. And it was like surprising that at such a young age, I can do project like that. But it wouldn't be possible if I wouldn't get all the support from my former boss back then, that trusted me and understood that this is, the direction I want to grow, and he gave me enough feedback and direction to make it work.
Okay, so I'm a new leader, and I'm responsible for, and I need to facilitate a systematic approach for the growth of my employees. What are the major obstacles that are going to get in my way that I should be aware of, and how do I solve them?
I think there's few. One, you need to make sure that people that want to grow, that they have a pretty good idea what's their end goal, right? Because without any goal in mind and without the reason why, it's really hard for them to figure out what they should be doing and why, right? So that's one thing. It's having this lighthouse in the distance, this goal they're trying to grow towards. Second is making sure that you know that as well. You know what the goal is, because ideally you want to help them grow into their own direction, not into what maybe where you personally would like to see them. So it's really on their motivations and wants and wishes. So that's the second, is making sure that there is a clarity for you as well. And then third is that they're spending actually enough time on career development and trying to improve, because it can be very easy to just be excited about all the product goals that are in your company, and you're just working on the product and shipping code. And I realized that if there is a strong product culture in company and people get excited about shipping value for customers, it can be easy to just lose track of your growth plans and just skip the time you previously dedicated to it. So I would say those three things is, one, making sure that everybody has a goal in mind. Second, making sure that there is actually a partnership between the engineer and the manager, and they're working together on this, and they're supporting, the manager is supporting the engineer. And then third is making sure that there is enough time dedicated to it.
So I'm going to maybe just try to dig deep on some of these obstacles you talk about, and try to throw you some versions of them that I think and I've seen, and maybe you have some more specific suggestions how to deal with those. I find, and this is a bit of the old man perspective here, I find that so one thing is making sure that you have a way of having a lighthouse in the distance. But at my age, I find that the lighthouse in the distance is a lot harder to get to than when I was younger. The deluge of technologies, blog posts, places that you can learn, ways that you can learn, different kinds of roles and opportunities. It's not about titles, but the different kinds of things you can do, even within technology, for me, has just exploded. So how do you help somebody wade through all that noise? I know that, okay, we want to get to a lighthouse in the distance, but imagine that actually the problem is not finding the lighthouse, but there are 30,000 lighthouses, and some of them aren't even really lighthouses. How do we narrow down to one that fits us? How do we help somebody get there?
Well, I would say, I wouldn't stress really about having it very clearly defined. And of course, somebody might say, yeah, I want to be CTO, or I want to be head of engineering at mid-sized company, and that's quite specific. For others, it might be more vague, right? And I think it's okay. I don't think the goal should be, just to have a meeting and then within 90 minutes figure out everything, right? I think this is ongoing conversation, and it's something that will change. And so I think what's most important is just actually to start having those conversations and start talking about where you see yourself and why, and really understand what are the specifics of the role that maybe you now think is your goal, but maybe it might change in the future, but core attributes will stay the same. So I think, just having the conversation at all is a great way how to start.
Yeah. So one of the things I heard from you is basically about having the lighthouse, but having flexibility. So you said it doesn't have to be too well developed, too well planned out. And another sort of obstacle I want to focus on there is sort of short-term versus long-term looks at how we want to do these things. And do you find that there's a tendency to of people to unnecessarily focus more on the short term or the long term when they're planning to do this, and what are the potential pitfalls of that?
Yeah, I think like one interesting thing is that people sometimes feel they are limited by their current role and responsibilities, right? Maybe you are a software engineer, but you feel like you want to maybe lead a whole engineering team someday in the future. And so it feels like, oh, the next step should be that, I need to grow into the engineering manager. But if there are no opportunities because there's no team that needs a new engineering manager, you might feel stuck, right? But actually, when you start thinking about, okay, so what is the role of CTO or of head of engineering about? Like, what are the skills I need to have? What are the experiences I need to have? And if you sit down and start listing them, and you will realize, okay, so I need to know how to interview candidates. I need to know how to present in front of people, for example. And suddenly, as a software engineer, individual contributor, you can already start doing both, right? You can already start doing maybe meetup talks and learn and practice how to talk in front of the bigger groups of people this way. And actually, individual contributors, engineers are more likely to have conference talks and meetup talks because there's just more meetup talks about engineering compared to engineering management. And so actually, you can start learning most of the things you'll need even as an engineer. And so I think, just having this mindset of trying to, not just focus on the title, but more about, okay, what are the aspects of the work and what are the skills I need to learn? And this way figure out, even though I'm not engineering manager yet, what are the things I can start doing now, I can start doing today to start learning and growing towards the goal.
Do you think there's some kind of special set of red flags to watch out for somebody where you can quickly tell that they're too focused on the title or the salary or the concrete what's happening next quarter or what's happening with my job description, and they're not really engaging with the bigger question of what do I really want, what's out there? Is there some phrase or some attitude that is easy to spot?
Well, I wouldn't say that I would flag those things necessarily as bad. So if somebody really thinks in terms of career ladders, after all, that's why career ladders were designed, right? Career ladders is a way how company is saying what's important for the company, and if you learn that and if you progress, you'll get a title, and hopefully it correlates with the impact in the company. So I think that it's okay to start thinking like this, but you might limit your opportunities this way, because if that's how most people are thinking, then there's just specific set of opportunities for, let's say, specific number of engineering managers the company needs, or specific number of principal engineer level projects the company is going to do. And so if you are thinking in this uniform way, it might be harder for you to progress.
You also mentioned as one of the sort of key obstacles is not enough time spent or not enough awareness from either the employee or the manager / leader. And I think this is a big one.
Yeah.
Because we all have a lot of things that we need to spend our time on. So how can you make sure that you spend enough time without spending too much time, or without feeling too pressured to spend time? What are the ways to make that work efficiently, let's say?
Yeah. Well, let me start with saying that you don't have to be working on personal development all the time. It's okay not to spend time on it for a while, because life happens. Maybe your first child was just born, or I don't know, like different things might happen, and you have different priorities in your life. So first, I just want to start with saying it's okay not to focus on it for some time, or maybe being happy where you are and just wanting more of the same. I think that's okay. But if you really want to progress, then you need to put the effort in it. And sometimes just the way how you pick projects to work on, and maybe the way how your manager is supporting you. But other times it might be just spending time on learning and reading, and maybe writing blog posts or anything you want to practice. It might be you might be doing more work that doesn't necessarily fit your weekly sprints or like the work of your team. And it's interesting is if you have very motivated people and you think about, so they maybe they every day they have a stand up and they have to be talking about what they implemented for a past day, and every maybe 2 weeks there is a demo where they are presenting their features, and they wanna feel proud about their accomplishments, and so they wanna work hard to deliver something that's meaningful, and they have high bars for themselves for their product work, and so they wanna put all the effort that they can into the work that's presented all the time. But since there isn't balance between how we talk about personal growth, you don't present on all hands what you learned, like how you maybe learned about new stack or I don't know, something like that. Then it's easy to just forget about it and stop doing it, because there's just so much kind of implicit motivation and pressure towards the product goals. And so I think this is a area where you as a manager can help a lot, because you can balance this product pressure with your own questions about the growth of your engineer. And so, for example, if they say, hey, I really would like to start writing blog posts, and that's I would like to write maybe my first 3 technical blog posts next quarter or half a year. Well, it sounds like maybe a good plan. Let's do it, right? So agreed. And so you might say, okay, so feel free to spend I don't know what time the person would need to do this, and that's like initial agreement, and it can easily stick with it, and you can easily say, yeah, that's okay, that's the plan, that's great. And I've seen many people to just go and do it and write those blog posts, and it's fine. But sometimes what will happen is after 2 months you'll ask them, hey, so how is it going with your blog posts? And he will say, hey, I actually haven't started because we had this release, and we're working hard on it, and so I focus on delivering the features we wanted to deliver, and so I haven't actually spent any time on writing the blog posts. And so it's like, interesting. So, okay, let's do maybe another check-in in a month. And then if in a month they'll say, hey, actually, I haven't progressed, then you can start helping them a bit more and say, okay, so what about we would agree that, until next week, let's come up with at least topics for those blog posts, or kind of like help them first break the bigger initiative, bigger project into smaller ones, smaller milestone. And then by asking them maybe with higher frequency, maybe every week, then you can balance this pressure. And so they will understand, okay, the company and you as a manager representing the company, so the company is actually, it does care about my growth. And this is a way how they're telling me that, maybe it's okay if our features we wanna ship will slip, just because I was writing blog posts, because blog posts might be important for the company as well, and maybe my growth might be important as well. And so this way, just by having like those discussions and coaching questions and helping them bring bigger initiative into smaller ones, you can actually help them actually spend the time they want to spend on it.
Yeah, I think we've hit a little bit of the overlap. You might have talked a little bit about organizational setup somewhere in this conversation. I can't remember. I might have heard that word. And so obviously as the individual leader or manager who has a direct report, I'm trying to facilitate their growth. But I'm going to give you an example and then a question. One example that follows on with your blog post topic, which I found really easy to do here at Product Board, is I found a great way to facilitate this is to give this employee, actually a real employee, several, in essence, an accountability buddy. And by that buddy, I mean somebody else in the company who cares about blog posts being written, but has no particular reason to hire or fire people, or no particular reason to give somebody a performance evaluation or anything like that. Because of course, as their manager, I want to be attentive to their growth. But if you give them somebody who is positively interested in blog posts being written, to give them some of the juice and motivation to do that, that's helpful, because then it's not always me as the leader. It's not always me. We're not always coming back to the growth conversations talking about that. They might have a social conversation about that with one of our copywriters, or they might seek out one of the copywriters and sort of tie themselves to some accountability. Hey, copywriter, I would really like to write a blog post. And then the copywriter will sort of check in with them. Do you have anything yet? Because if we need to slot it into our schedule or whatever. And I think there's an overlap here with the question of organizational setup, because you can imagine an organization where people wouldn't feel comfortable. They wouldn't know who the copywriter was. It wouldn't be easy to make that introduction. So you don't have to follow up on the blog post example specifically. I wanted to use that to kind of make the topic more concrete, because it's worked fantastically for me in a lot of ways, but very specifically for the blog posting example. And I think there's a piece of product board and the way you set it up in there. So maybe not as more than just a line manager, maybe as a leader of a department or an organization or let's say a group of teams or a tribe, even if we're talking about engineering. What are the considerations about what do you need to concretely do to facilitate growth? Because I think there's some responsibility and some thinking required there as well.
Well, one thing is, and now we are talking about, making sure that the time is spent really. And it's interesting how, for me, this was complex to figure out, because, for ages you wanted to start writing blog posts, and I said that, so anybody that has an idea what to write a blog post about, you have, 1 or 2 days or maybe 3 days. You can just, maybe stay home, not ship any features, and just start working on it and write your blog post. And surprisingly, not that many people done it. And so I was like, wow, so, why this doesn't work? Like, what's the issue here? And I think one is really goal setting. So, and now when we are talking about growth plans, that's usually what you mean by that is, you already have your, lighthouse in the distance, and you know why you want to start writing blog posts. Maybe you want to grow into staff engineering, want to be great at writing engineering design docs, and so you want to learn how to write about technical topics, and so that's maybe your goal. And but that's very far in the distance, and as a manager you want to break it down and figure out with your engineer something that would be very concrete for next 3 to 6 months. And so this is the first thing is, okay, so let's write down the goals you want to achieve. Let's be very specific, and let's put a time deadline to it. And so that's a good start.
So you just mentioned pretty recently some really important words that come up with this topic, which is, I think, the first time we've uttered them in this podcast, which is a growth plan. So yeah. It seems we've established that we need to spend time on growth. We need to have a lighthouse in the distance, and then we need a growth plan to get us there. But what is a growth plan really?
Yeah, I think it's interesting is that it's actually can be very different for everybody. And I've seen a lot of different templates, and I don't really care which one you'll use. It's more like what the person feels they need. And so sometimes it might be just okay, the plan is, let's say, for me to write X number of blog posts or do X number of public talks, and that's it, right? And there's time frame, let's say half a year, and you have your 3-5 bullet points written down in your one-on-one document, and it's something that then you can get back to from time to time to do a check-in, and then in half a year you can review the progress. Or it can be much more detailed, right? So if the goal is you want to start leading bigger bigger initiatives, and really being a good communicator, speaker is really important for you. You can put together much more detailed set of things that you can help the person get a speaking coach. Maybe they need English courses because they're not native speaker, and then you can really break it down in a lot of smaller things to work on, and it might help with progressing faster, with motivation, with making sure that there's enough time to spend on it. So I think it really depends on the people, what they feel they need.
Do you have any specific example of a really weird need or a really surprising something that somebody needed for their growth plan, or is it just more every experience is different? And
I think it's usually it starts with very broad generic description, and then the because you don't want to force or try to push some structure on people if they don't feel they need it, right? But then if you will both agree that actually the progress isn't that great, then you can try to help more and ask questions. Okay, so you wanna get great at writing good engineering design docs. So what's the next step you can do? Maybe we don't have a person that already knows how to do it in our current company, so maybe let's figure out who you could talk to and learn this from. So maybe the next step is let's create a list of people that are great at this, and let's maybe let's start reading what they're writing, and let's connect with them and let's talk to them directly, something like that. So you as a manager can be a coach in this conversation, helping them figure out what are the things they could do to actually progress, and then that's something you can fill into the growth plan.
Yeah, and you brought up the magic word of coach, so I think it's a nice segue to, okay, we've created a growth plan, but then how do we make the growth plan happen? And I'm sort of, spoiler alert, I'm giving away part of it because there's some coaching involved, but okay, we've established that we need to have a growth plan, but maybe there's some conversations, but at some point we have embarked on the growth plan, but how do we make sure we get through it and we find some way to get where we plan to go?
Yeah. So one thing is, where this is extremely beneficial to have all those conversations is that, now you can be much better at giving feedback. So we have this culture of radical candor, which means caring about people personally, but challenging them directly. And what I learned is that, for example, somebody is giving a presentation on internal meetup or internal all hands, and I see things that could be improved, right? Because it's okay, but not great. And in most cases, I would typically let that slip because, it's not we are engineers, we are not professional public speakers. Maybe knowing how to give great talk isn't something that is on top of our priorities, and people have, different problems to solve first. And so I wouldn't give maybe any feedback at that point, or if I would, maybe it wouldn't be taken that well because it wouldn't create a good atmosphere, let's say. But if I know that that person wants to be great public speaker because that's something they need to learn for their future career, it's much easier because now we are aligned on this goal and we are working together. So I know that if I'll give them feedback, they will know that I'm giving them because I know that that's their goal and I'm trying to help them to reach their goal. And so it makes just giving feedback much more easier, and I know what to focus on, and now it's my duty actually to do it. And so that's one thing. And second thing are those check-ins, just having continuous conversation. Maybe the goal should change. Maybe there's some learning that's affecting what the priority is, or it's just asking a lot of questions.
So clearly these conversations in different phases in developing the growth plan, in executing the growth plan, these conversations are very important. So I'm willing to go as deep down the hole as you want to about how do these conversations work? How do we do them? Or if you want to start with what are the right things to do, or things you've seen gone wrong, or any really specific thing that you think could be helpful to somebody trying to really grasp how to get started with this topic of how to have these conversations? You started with feedback. We could stay with feedback, or
Yeah, I think it really depends what the problem is at this point. When the problem is really figure out where the person wants to lead, what's their goal. Then there's this great book I just read like a while back. It's called Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, which is actually just a book focused on how to have those conversations, and so how to ask right questions and help people figure this out for themselves. And there's actually a deck of cards that you can buy that has great examples of questions you can ask either about their past, their future, maybe their present, that can help uncover this. And there's a couple of things I tried, and one of them is really start from the beginning, and really you need to be you need to want to learn more about those people and really be genuinely curious about them. And sometimes it feels a bit like extension of the interview you already had. And so really, okay, so they're already hired, and probably something about them already from the interviews if you had the chance to interview them personally. But this is kind of conversation you can continue having, and so you can really talk about their past and different jobs, and most importantly to focus on why they switched from one job to another. What were the reasons why they stopped liking the previous job? So maybe there were things they had to do they didn't particularly liked, or there were things they wanted to do but there was not enough of those at the previous company, and so it's super interesting to just go into this conversation. And I had few of them just recently with few people here at Product Board, and sometimes they were like 90-minute conversations all the way back to almost kindergarten to the school, where actually those early experiences might be very interesting as well, because I had this engineer, and I was never really thinking about him as a manager, because he was just so deep in the technical stuff. And I feel like that's the prototype of really like specialist engineer that really wants to go super deep and understand everything and break everything apart and build, put it back together just to understand how it works. But then we started to have this conversation, and he was telling me, actually, I started my first company, or kind of almost a company, when he was like 14, and he just put together a group of friends, and they started working on implementing a game. And then again, when he was like 17, again, something like that happened, where he just, wanted to work on something with more people, but actually he realized that he never was like the best engineer maybe in that group, but he really enjoyed just, putting those people together and making sure they're excited about the project they are working on. And even he at one point was like, I felt like maybe I just my goal is just to make them happy and maybe brew coffee or something, but just they've done such a great job already, and I really enjoyed it. And then this pattern was again in when we talk about university and how he worked on team assignments. Again, he was usually the communicator, and so it's interesting how much contrast there was between his tendencies before and now his deep excitement about technology. And so that helped me understand really more about where he's coming from, and why he might have different motivations or ambitions.
Yeah, I recently actually had a very similar experience with someone who's out of a completely different team than mine, who I discovered had what I would call a secret hobby. And I actually scheduled a meeting to discuss that person's secret hobby with them to get to know them better.
Yeah.
They're not on my team, but I think this is something I can share with other people to get to know something about them better. Not the secret hobby, that's a secret, but what I think they should, take a look at with this person.
Yeah. And so you can either have those, you can schedule a bigger session and maybe go for a coffee or beer and talk about this. And usually it's surprisingly pleasant conversation. Some people tend to like to talk about them. And so it's not like hard conversation to have. And it's super interesting, this, past experiences of people, and that will help you really see them in slightly different light. But then as well, you don't have to do it in one meeting. You can this is something that you can do, in some of your one-on-ones, and just have 1 or 2 questions prepared for maybe every other one-on-one to talk through. And I mentioned before this, deck of cards from the book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, that is something that I personally am using sometimes as an inspiration. It's just a deck of cards, and you can pull in one, and it's like a question written on it. And I'll read you one example now. For example, this says, what kind of work have you typically gravitated away from? And so that's interesting. And now you can ask the question, and it will tell you, hey, I don't know, I don't like work that doesn't have any UI, because I want to see what I'm working on. So I like features that are like visual or something. And so, and you can start having those conversations. Why? And that will really help you understand people more. And it will help you, decide actually, what kind of work they would like in the future.
So I actually cheated a little bit, and I read the same book. So I have some ideas of my own about this, and a few of the things that I really loved about it, I'll share with you and see if you have any reflection. But number one, most of all, was to make this less intimidating for me as the leader, as the manager, because it gives me, the book is very specific about giving me the permission to be the facilitator of the employee's growth, and the growth actually being the employee's sole responsibility. Have you felt that doing anything for you in your practice of this?
I mean, like in general, I would say with any goal setting, if you want to make it work, you need to have those people that are responsible for reaching those goals to set them for themselves. It doesn't have to be necessarily connected with personal growth. It can be, product objective. So ideally, the team should set it for themselves. And so I've seen that work much better. Yeah.
As a perfect counterpoint to that statement, even though, yes, we want to have sort of clear, concrete actionables and ownership, the book makes the point that when you have these conversations with an employee, don't jump too quickly from possibility to action. You gave a story about learning about somebody's past. There's a lot of other different kinds of questions you can ask. And as a person who likes to solve problems, which a lot of leaders or managers are, your tendency can be, oh, I have the insight, I have just the action for that. Let me introduce that into the conversation right now. And it's also reinforced by the idea that you should sort of leave every meeting with action points, not just career conversations.
Yeah.
And I really liked the impetus, which I have as a person for sure, but not necessarily as a leader. Let the idea breathe. I thought it was almost like I drew a kind of a connection with product discovery.
Yeah.
You don't jump into the delivery phase too early, right? You give the discovery time to play out. So that was a huge one for me, and a great balance to the idea of we need ownership here, we need action here, but we don't need action before we've really given the ideas time to breathe. So those are two ideas that were really strongly impactful for me.
Yeah, there's maybe one more thing that I found influential. It's called Alliance, and it's by Reid Hoffman and a couple of more people from, I think they're from LinkedIn. It's quite short and high level, but basically what they're saying is that, when you are hiring an employee, you are actually like joining a mutual alliance that should be like mutually beneficial. It's not about money per se, but it's more like, what the employee can get from working here, like what we can offer them on top of money. And usually it's it's some sort of career progression. And either there's some theory around it where it's a bit different. If you're junior, maybe you don't have to have this very clearly defined. And then on the complete opposite of the spectrum, maybe if you are head of design at Apple, you don't need more career progressions. You're happy where you are. But usually, what I like to think is, okay, so this person most likely, if I look at statistics of the engineering market, they will leave at some point, maybe in 2-3 years. And so if they'll be leaving product board, what's the next job they will have? Like how they want to feel equipped to do the next challenge. And so agreeing on this quite explicitly is, okay, so you are here because maybe you want to start your own product startup in the future. What we can do to help you get there. It's great. So it's great to have this early on and very explicitly stated, because then you can make sure that they're continuously growing towards this goal and they won't leave because they feel that they're not learning anything new. And of course, sometimes you might reach the goal and then you can talk more and figure out what's the next goal. Maybe there's something else they could learn in the company and progress while staying there. Or maybe the best thing for them is to leave, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, this reminds me of a phrase that I used in a slightly different context recently, that to make yourself a challenging partner, not an adversary in any of these kind of processes. Yeah. So obviously it can't be soft, right? You can't say, I'm here for you and I'm going to do everything for you, but I am a partner for you. I am somebody who's going to help you on this path, but I'm going to do it by challenging you.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd use that phrase out of nowhere. Maybe it's been written somewhere, but I thought of it with your alliance. The two people in the alliance can be challenging partners to each other, or the organization and the person. Well, we're going to have to give up this room for other exciting product board activities, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you had a good time as well.
Yeah, me too. Thanks a lot, Josh.
Thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to sharing this and many other interesting conversations about these exciting topics with you right here on the Product Board Engineering Leadership Podcast. Thanks for listening.